Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Gateways. This is episode number 10, and I hope you all enjoy. Today we're going to be talking about going further into the basics of rhythm and the value of pitch duration and how exactly we distinguish pitch duration in a compositional setting. So let's just begin. So rhythm, as you know, is composed of measures and beats. The measures is basically like the period of time, like it's a set period of time within a piece, and then the beats are the subdivisions of that measure, right? So keeping that in mind, let's start off by talking about pitch duration. Now, if we didn't have different durations of pitches, then there would be no such thing as melodic lines, because melodic lines are entirely comprised of different durations of pitches to create a line of music that can be repeated and enjoyed. So how exactly do you do this process? Well, depending on things like time signature and tempo, the length of your measure will differ, but you can divide your measure into smaller subdivisions to represent different periods of time within the music. So let's use the basic time signature, also known as tom and time, which is 4/4, which means that there are 4 quarter notes per measure. And let's talk about the various types of subdivisions. So the most basic subdivision would be the whole note. And what a whole note is, it's a note that lasts for the duration of the measure. So in the case of 4/4, a whole note would last 4 beats. It would not stop, there would be no point of rest, it would be a continuous pitch from the beginning of the measure to the end of the measure. This is commonly used in things like harmonic resolution. If you want it to be very solid and grounded, you could use a whole tone. If you want to create a very airy feel to your music, you can use a whole tone. Yeah, and so that's a whole note. Now what's a half note? Well, a half note is a note which has a duration that is half of the measure. And again, that depends on the time signature you're in. But in the case of 4/4, that means that it's a note that lasts for 2 beats. So in 4/4, it would last the duration of 1, 2, and then stop. And then, let's just go through them a little bit faster then, because it makes more sense to. So then you have quarter notes, quarter tones. With quarter notes, it's every fourth of the measure a note is how long a note will last. You can see there's kind of a pattern here. So you have, if there's 4 beats in a measure, then a quarter note, if played continuously, would sound off 4 separate times with rests between them, unless they were slurred. But in the context of if there were just 1, and it was on beat 1, that means in the context of 1, 2, 3, 4, it would play on 1, and it would be a rest for the rest of them. Now, there are divisions further than this. You have 8th note division, which means that in our 1, 2, 3, 4, in our 4/4 environment, you take each beat and you divide it in half. So instead of being 1, 2, 3, 4, it's now 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that's what is commonly used to refer to it. Is if someone says the and of 1, then that means they're talking about the second half of the first beat. And so with 8th notes, they can be placed in the case of 4/4, one of 8 positions within the measure. And of course, after that, you have 16th notes, which, if you're dividing 8th counting into 16th counting, you divide each of the 8th note beats by 1/2. Now it's, instead of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, it's now 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. And, the way that you can remember it when you need to is 1 E and a, and that will represent the 4 subdivided beats that you just got. And these also aren't the only type of subdivisions you can have. You also have things called tuplets. Now, what are tuplets? Well, the one I'll present today, the example will be the triplet. And basically, what a tuplet is it's a different kind of division of notes within a measure. So like it's like they're evenly condensed or expanded over a specific period of time, right? So let's say you want to play a quarter note triplet. That means that instead of going 1, 2, it's now basically, I'll use the phrasing for it that's used to remember it. It's now triplet. So like if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, right? It means you'd go triplet, 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 triplet. So it's a division of 3 in 2 beats, right? So there are a lot of different kinds of tuplets. You have like triplets, quintuplets, duplets, quadruplets, whatever. And it's dependent entirely on like, the time signature you're in and etc. And they're very useful for creating certain feelings in your rhythms. But yeah, those are kind of like, that's the basics of subdivisions within your music. And, now we can kind of start talking about how you can apply these rhythmically and, melodically. Because if you're designing a harmonic line, you wouldn't want it all to be in quarter notes because that would be boring. If you're designing a melodic line that you want to create like a certain emotion behind it, then making everything a singular thing would just make it dull. There wouldn't be any emotion behind it. And something else to keep in mind, which is very important, you do not need to always fill the space with noise whenever you're creating a piece of music. And that's where the rest comes in. A rest in traditional music notation is just a period of time in which whatever player is reading that piece of music does not play. And these rests, just like pitch duration, can be divided into a set of, they can be subdivided. So just like there are eighth notes, there are also eighth note rests. Just like there are 30-second notes, there are 30-second note rests. Just like there are triplets, there are triplet rests. And these are important because, silence in music is sometimes very powerful. And just constantly filling your piece with noise will not garner the feelings you want. Really, like, just filling the space to fill it, it's not good, but sometimes the silence can be the most musical part of your entire piece, right? So, keeping that in mind, we're not going to apply it to melody yet, because we're going to talk more about melody later. But we're going to talk about rhythm in terms of, what people think of when they think of rhythm, and that would be something that's meant to drive forward the entire piece. Now, you have the rhythm that's applied to the melodic and harmonic lines, and then you have the underlying rhythm, which is meant to carry the whole thing, and to keep, traditionally to keep the performers on lock with things like the tempo. And designing like a groove is entirely dependent on the type of music you're going for. Because like if you want a very like straight groove in your piece where it's very like, it's simple but it's powerful, like maybe you're going for like, an orchestral piece that needs very strong percussive motion, but that motion needs to be on beat, then you have to write it that way, and you have to write it considering, okay, what are the subdivisions that I need this rhythm to play on, to place emphasis on certain things played by the rest of the orchestra, etc. Now, if you want something like a jazz feeling, then you need to also think of, things like swing, which what swing is there's two types of counting, kind of. You have straight counting, which is like just traditional 1, 2, 3, 4, and if that's 4/4, so like all the beats land exactly where they're supposed to. But then the more swing you add to that, the more it kind of changes how that rhythm goes in terms of the distance. So, what's a good example? You have 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a straight groove, right? But then if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, that's kind of a swing. It's a swung groove, because it's a difference in the duration of time between the different notes. In that case, what I did was I shortened the amount of time between 2 and 3, and I lengthened the amount of time between 1 and 4. And, changing the duration of time between the different pitches can also give very unique feelings. For example, a very commonly used rhythmic trope in like hip hop is the use of it's like a J Dilla style of playing, or a drunkard style of playing, in which you are constantly just off of where the beat is, but you're consistently off the same amount. So like it's like every single time the beat hits, you are a 16th off in terms of percussion, and you're always a 16th off, and it creates a very unique feeling. I'd recommend, actually, if you're going for that kind of feel, you listen to some of his music. You can also listen to things like Time Alone With You by Jacob Collier does a lot of that style of groove. I know that it was done by Sungazer in their first album on a song that was called Drunk. And it's a very unique style of playing, but it's, it can entirely be done. And basically all that's being said here is that if you want a piece which has a certain feel, then you have to know, okay, what subdivisions of notes do I have to do? How long does each pitch have to go? How is my percussion playing? How are they playing relative to the different subdivisions? Is there any change in the way that they're playing because I've decided to add something like swing to it? Where does the pulse land when the music's actually playing? Etc. And that's something that you have to do while composing. So, with that being said, that's all for today. It's a bit of a shorter one. The rhythm ones are going to be a bit shorter because it's a lot, like there will be a lot more musical examples in the next one. It's just because this concept is like limited to discuss, it couldn't be as long as some of the other ones. But I look forward to learning more about rhythm and teaching you guys. So have a good morning, afternoon, night, wherever you are in the world, and thank you for tuning in.